There's a telephone conversation between the president and the vice president. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you hear any part of the phone call, even if just the end that the president was speaking from?
I did, yes.
All right, and what'd you hear?
So as I was dropping off the note, I remember hearing the word wimp. Either he called him a wimp. I don't remember if he said, you are a wimp, you'll be a wimp. Wimp is the word I remember.
And the word that she relayed to that the president called the vice president, I apologize for being impolite, but do you remember what she said her father called him?
The P word.
And then on that day, President Trump asked me to put him over the Constitution, but I chose the Constitution, and I always will. Anyone who puts themselves over the Constitution should never be president of the United States. And anyone who asks someone else to put themselves over the Constitution should never be president of the United States again.
Jackson had a bad breakup with his first vice president, John C. Calhoun. He hoped his new vice president, Martin Van Buren, would pull a Tony Braxton and unbreak my heart. You'd think Calhoun and Jackson could have made it work, seeing as how they were both slave owners from the Carolinas. But as far as Jackson was concerned, Calhoun was a spoiled rich boy. Jackson was an orphan by the age of 14. He had to move to the Tennessee wilderness to make his living while Calhoun's family sent him to Yale. Calhoun represented the elite, people born with money and connections who wielded undeserved power over everyone else. The fact that Calhoun was a nullifier willing to destroy the country to protect that power just made it worse. Elites were everywhere, from large plantation owners in the South to bankers and businessmen in the North. Jackson believed the people elected him to protect them from the elites. He was an instrument of the American people, their warrior, or, as John Meacham would write, the American lion. This is how Jackson justified many of his actions as president, especially his most controversial ones. His opponents claimed this was just an excuse to act like a despot, an arbitrary king. They compared him to Napoleon, who had just recently plunged Europe into war, acting like a defender of the people himself. Was it a coincidence that both men made their names in the military? He was both a popular hero and a dangerous psychopath. That was the verdict back then, and that seems to be the verdict today. We see both traits in action in his war against the bank. Back when George Washington was president, his day one, Alexander Hamilton said, "We should create a national bank." Thomas Jefferson said, "No thanks, a national bank would just give rich people in the North more power." But they made the bank anyway, so Jefferson killed it when he became president. Then the country went into debt with the War of 1812. The next president, James Madison, said, "You know what would really help repay this debt? A national bank." So they created another one. The Second Bank of the United States was created in 1816. The bank helped build roads and canals to connect the country together, the so-called American system. It became easier to trade, and the economy boomed as a result. Adams, Calhoun, and Clay all supported the bank. What was there not to love? Who doesn't love economic booms? The bank's president, Nicholas Biddle, knew that everyone FW'd his bank heavy, including all of Washington, D.C.'s heavy hitters. He was a national W man. And so was Andrew Jackson. When he was first elected president in 1828, Biddle was like, "Cool, we're just two W men. Game peep game." Jackson didn't feel the same way. Not only was Biddle another pampered rich boy like Calhoun, but he was also way too popular. The bank was way too popular. There was only room for only one beloved W man, and it was Jackson. Of course, Jackson couldn't come out and say this. Instead, he said he was worried about the power of the bank. Out of its 25 directors, the government was only able to appoint 5 of them. That meant Biddle didn't have to listen to Congress or the president. It controlled the country's money, but was totally unaccountable to the country. It was a powerful institution over which Jackson had no control. Shortly after Jackson's inauguration, his Secretary of the Treasury, Samuel Ingham, received a letter from New Hampshire. The letter claimed that the head of the bank over there openly supported John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay in the recent election. Now that Adams and Clay had lost, the bank had been treating Jackson supporters very unfairly. Ingham asked Biddle to investigate the accusation, which he did and found to be false. Biddle then wrote a letter to Ingham telling him this, and adding that Ingham should probably keep his nose out of bank business. The bank was an independent entity. They didn't get involved with politics and didn't want politicians to get involved with them. Jackson was upset. Not only did he have no control over the bank, but the bank also supported his rivals. They had enormous resources. What could Jackson ever do if they decided to come after him? Biddle visited the White House to calm Jackson's nerves. He told him he had nothing to worry about, that his job was to help the economy run well no matter who the president was. Jackson treated him politely, even thanking him for helping him repay the national debt, which was scheduled to be retired by 1833. He even said he would thank Biddle personally for this in the upcoming message to Congress. But Jackson's 1829 message to Congress had no thank yous for Biddle. He suggested getting rid of the Electoral College so that presidents could be directly chosen by the people, a change that has become popular again in recent years thanks to getting 2 Republican presidents in a row that the people didn't choose. Then he moved on to the bank. He pulled a Donald Trump by using the "people are saying," as in, people are saying that the bank may not be totally legal. It's a way to criticize something without taking responsibility for it. In the cases of both Jackson and Trump, the only people saying anything is them.
So many people are saying, you've got to run again. They love the job we're doing. A lot of people are saying maybe we like a dictator.
Even the Supreme Court ruled that the bank was legal in 1819. What was he talking about? Biddle understood that Jackson was throwing subs. When Jackson announced he was running for re-election against Henry Clay in 1832, Biddle saw his chance to strike. You see, the Second Bank of the United States was created in 1816 after Congress approved and President Madison signed a 20-year charter. This meant that the bank would have to be reapproved in 1836. But Biddle asked, what if the bank went up for reapproval in 1832? Right before the election. If Congress passed a new charter, Jackson would have to decide whether he wanted to approve it or veto it. If Jackson approved it, at least the bank would be safe. If Jackson vetoed it, he would have to explain to the country why he messed up the economy in an election year. Biddle worked with Henry Clay to get a new bank charter through Congress. A member of the House of Representatives named Samuel Price Carson announced that he would vote against it. But he ended up voting for it after getting a mysterious loan from the bank. To Jackson, this just proved how powerful and corrupt the bank was. Congress approved it, and the bank charter was delivered to Jackson's desk for his approval or his veto. Jackson wasn't afraid to veto things. Early in his presidency, he vetoed a bill to build a road from Maysville, Kentucky to Louisville, Kentucky. His reasoning was that since it was a Kentucky road, Kentucky could pay for it. Most people saw it as Jackson's way of screwing over his Kentucky rival, Henry Clay. It was the first of 12 Andrew Jackson vetoes. By contrast, the previous 6 presidents had vetoed 9 laws combined over a 40-year period. By using the veto, Jackson forced Congress to make bills he was likely to sign. And hey, if they brought him good laws to sign, maybe nice articles would be written about them in the newspapers. Maybe their friends could get government jobs. The veto was a tool that Jackson used to bend Congress to his will and keep unity in the Democratic Party. But would he dare veto the bank in an election year? After all, Biddle and Clay had newspapers too. They made sure to run glowing articles about the bank, educating people about its usefulness. A veto could trigger economic disaster that could lose Jackson the election. In July of 1832, Jackson did veto the bank and sent his explanation to the newspapers. He said the bank was a tool for the rich to maintain their money and power at the expense of the poor. As he wrote, "It is to be regretted that the rich and powerful too often bend the acts of government to their selfish purposes. When the laws make the rich richer and the potent more powerful, the humble members of society, the farmers, mechanics, and laborers, who have neither the time nor the means of securing like favors to themselves, have a right to complain of the injustice to their government." The Congress and the Supreme Court may have said that the bank was permitted, but that didn't make it good for the people. And as the people's champion, it was only right for him to destroy it. His opponents were horrified. Who was he to go against what Congress and the Supreme Court wanted? Daniel Webster said in the Senate, "There never before was a moment in which any president would have been tolerated in asserting such a claim to despotic power." In other words, Jackson really was an American Napoleon. Not that any of this hurt Jackson in the election. He trounced Henry Clay in 1832. His veto message seemed to work. How much more damage could he do with another 4 years in office? Biddle was determined to find out. As long as the bank had a few more months of life, he was going to play every card available. And what better card does any bank have than a credit card? Everyone owed the bank money. All the loans made by the bank over the years allowed the economy to expand along with the money supply. What if Biddle asked for all that money back all at once? The process would work in reverse. The economy would shrink along with the money supply. Biddle figured if he could cause economic chaos, he could show everyone just how much they needed the bank. Congress would feel pressured to make another bank, and Jackson would feel pressure not to veto it this time. In Jackson's famous words, "The bank is trying to kill me, but I will kill it." Rather than back down from Biddle's challenge, Jackson prepared for a fight. When governors visited the White House begging Jackson to do something about the crappy economy, Jackson told them to talk to Biddle. He was the guy who had their money. Biddle may have had a credit card, but Jackson had a debit card. In other words, the government deposited all of its money in Biddle's bank. What if Jackson took all the money out? It would take away Biddle's leverage. He asked his cabinet, specifically his new Secretary of the Treasury, William Duane, if he should do this. Duane responded, "You probably shouldn't. Where are you going to put the money?" Jackson said, "I'll put the money in state banks around the country, especially banks run by my pals in the Democratic Party." It sounded like madness to Duane. He told the president he couldn't support that move. If Jackson insisted on doing that, then he should be prepared to fire him. Jackson took him up on that offer. He pulled the government's deposits out of Biddle's bank and scattered them around the country into what his opponents called pet banks. Then he fired Duane. It caused monetary chaos across the country for the next 80 years. Each state printed its own currency and set its own interest rates. The American financial system became unreliable, prone to wild, unpredictable swings. The only money that was accepted everywhere was gold, which was tough to come by for the average person. People would have to wait until 1913 for another central bank, the Federal Reserve, to bring some semblance of order to America's monetary system. The American people clearly didn't win the bank war, but Jackson did. He laid low the old financial elite, but replaced it with a new elite loyal to him and the Democrats. At least that's how Clay, Calhoun, and Webster saw it. Clay referred to himself and everyone else who fought Jackson during the bank war as Whigs, which was the name of a political party back in England that opposed the power of the king. By labeling themselves Whigs, Jackson's opponents were labeling him as a wannabe king. The Whig Party became a new political party in the United States, one that stood against Jackson and the Democrats. Clear battle lines were now drawn in American politics. Would the Whigs be able to stop Jackson's most brutal power grab of all? Would they be able to stop him from ethnically cleansing the Native Americans from the South? That will be the subject of Part 6.